Welcome to Sinister Heroes. I'm your host, Danny Iniquitous. Thank you for tuning in. Today's episode, we're talking about the Trickery domain Cleric. This is a cleric that I think really fits into the Feywild, and the next couple of videos are going to be a little bit about the Feywild because it's so creepy and dark and wild and crazy, and I feel like a lot of people have a missed opportunity in how they perceive that. So the next couple of videos are going to touch on that, and some classes I think really fit into that Feywild ability. So if you like what we do here, please like, share, subscribe, keep commenting. Love to hear from you guys and the incredible builds you guys come up with and the awesome experiences you have playing some of these classes. And before we get the video officially started, a big shout out to our producer D-Span for helping get this video together and really putting himself out there, trying to show people ways to increase their health, better their lives, and being open about his own troubles in doing so, and really showing what it's like to start from scratch, to have to try and do these things and learn all over again how to be healthy. It's really inspirational. The link to his channel is in the description. Please, please, please check it out. And without further ado, let's jump into the Trickery domain Cleric. The Trickery domain Cleric has a lot of cool gods that are traditionally tied to it. You might have seen this cleric before in Critical Role if you saw Campaign 2 where Laura Bailey was Jester. She played this character very, very well. Her representation of a Trickery domain Cleric was really, really great. I'm going to go into a little bit about what I think can be done with a Trickery domain Cleric, and I'm really going to want to show you why I kind of get to some of these points. One of the things I wanted to mention, because you are a Cleric, you are beholden to a god in a way that's somewhat similar to a Warlock, but more of a willing gift without really a definitive exchange or contract, where you're just really devout and faithful, and the god has realized that and has given you these gifts, but without taking something from you. So the relationship with gods is very, very important when you're creating a cleric, no matter what cleric you create. Gods of trickery are mischief makers and instigators who stand at a constant challenge to the accepted order of among both gods and mortals. They're patrons of thieves, scoundrels, gamblers, rebels, and liberators. Their clerics are a disruptive force in the world, puncturing pride, mocking tyrants, stealing from the rich, freeing captives, flaunting hollow traditions. They prefer subterfuge, pranks, deception, and theft rather than direct confrontation. What's really, really great about that description is it really gives you this opening to be very, very wild, very crazy, but very focused on really hitting some goals, really trying to change perceptions, or really reflect what a mischief god actually does. You bring people down a peg so that way they can realize their humility and change, ideally for the better. But I think this works really great when incorporating the aspect of the Feywild. Fey is one of those things where everyone thinks it's like nice and it's pretty and it's like all these colors and wonderful songs and all these things like that, but the Fae are really dangerous. They're really overshadowed with this great happy nature, but like they take you and your life doesn't matter to them. When you go into the Feywild, you continue to age, but you look exactly like you did when you walked in if you're not natively from there. So when you leave, your age catches up to you in an instant. And you have no concept of time when you're there. You might think you're there for a week, but come back 45 years later and just your body cannot take you anymore and just drop. The Fae are very manipulative. There's a lot of charms, fears, and those kinds of illusionary magics that really imprint who and what you are, and they use them freely. They are very, very, very big on doing that and manipulating people for their own personal gain, for their laughter, whatever. You're just a toy to them. And there are the Dark Celadrine and all those Fae gods that are just really traditionally creepy. But all the Fae gods are traditionally creepy. They're there just to abuse you for their own personal gain. If you're not one of them, you're just a toy to be used, broken, and then cast aside. They pick and choose what interests them, and they don't tend to care about what the repercussions are, because they act so grandiose and godlike. So when you were incorporating this like wild kind of aspect to it, I like to think of it like Almost how like vampires would use charm just to manipulate people to do what they want. The Fae really do that as well. So when you really want to incorporate things like that, if you were creating a Fae villain, say you're a DM and you're looking for some inspiration, charm on player characters is devastating. It will totally ruin a party completely. You charm the most aggressive one right before combat starts. Now your party has to work around their biggest damage dealer, protecting the enemy. You can manipulate their memories and imprint these ideas on them, and it really, really reflects a whole manipulative thing. But the Fae don't care that much. They're not that far ahead thinkers, because none of this really matters to them. It's just something they're doing in their pastime. So incorporating that is really, really devastating. And I'm going to go a little bit more when I start getting into the skills and some of the builds of what you can do with the Trickery domain Cleric. Every cleric gains access to domain spells, which are always prepared. I just want to mention a couple just so you really have an understanding as to what the Trickery domain is really set up to kind of be like. You get Charm Person and Disguise Self. Those two spells are very, very intricate for role-playing, specifically if you wanted to do some adventuring things where you might want to get caught, or you wanted to make your way through a scenario and you wanted to avoid some sort of confrontation or get information out of somebody. Charm Person is wonderful for that. It gives you the availability to have advantage on all your charisma checks and persuasives, deceptions, things like that, and your friend acts like a close acquaintance to you. It's a great way to set up circumstances, especially if you're new in an area, or at least you're in a scenario where you can get away with charming someone and then leaving immediately afterwards. Disguise Self, sometimes you just need to look like someone. The important thing about Disguise Self is it also changes your appearance as far as your clothing or your armor that you're wearing. Mirror Image is one of those things that has a very cool description to it, a very cool subtext, and I think it's a very fun thing, being very elusive and trickery like Loki in all the Marvel movies, where you always see there's at least two of them around. You kind of plays on that, which is something else that the trickster will get anyway. Blink, I think, is awesome. It's just one of those spells that's fun. If you really wanted to be an evil person, dominating another person is a great way to do that. And you get Dominate Person when you're a 9th level cleric. Understand it is purely a terrible thing to control someone else's mind in the context of any ability that influences people. You're really taking over someone who definitely does not give you permission to do so. So there's definitely a certain evilness to that, and if you really want to enforce that, it's definitely something you might want to try. At level 1, you gain Blessing of the Trickster. Starting when you choose this domain at first level, you can use an action to touch a willing creature other than yourself to give it advantage on dexterity stealth checks. This blessing lasts for an hour or until you use this feature again. There's no real limit to this, so you can just 1, 2, 3, 4, just keep going whenever you feel like it. This brings up a very interesting concept that I have and I often, toy with and try to enforce when I'm playing mischievous kind of characters. It's manipulation of the team. Now, you're not trying to make anybody do anything they don't want. Again, the people you're playing with are your friends, so be considerate. But using things like this helps to reinforce someone to do things for you. Depending on how your character's motivations are, you guys are going to save the princess from the tower. Who goes in first? Well, I think the best person to go in would definitely need advantage, so that way they don't startle anyone they're not necessarily wanting to right off the bat. So you just tap someone and give it to them. That automatically puts this responsibility on this character, and now they kind of have to, feel encouraged to do something. You're really using it for your own personal gain, and you're kind of manipulating the circumstance in order to make another player do something for you. That perspective is really how you're going to gain your playful manipulation of the events around you. So incorporate things like that and really focus on what that means for you. You can do this to NPCs. You can do this to other people. You can do this wherever you want, as long as you can convince them to be willing. And I think Charm Person could do that. You know, charm someone to walk into an area, scope it out, and come back. Give them the blessing. They're more encouraged. They're already charmed. They'll do it. They're not going to get in danger. They have blessing of the trickster god. That's the reason to have someone walk into a room and get killed. It works. You can use this to your benefit. It's one of those things where stealth is always important into the game, so the mechanic there is viable. Give it to your tanks, your heavy armor people, or your people just don't have the dexterity to do things. It's always beneficial, and it's important that you understand you're putting it on someone so you don't have to do it. And that perspective is where you start to get in touch with this Feywild aspect of your character, where you're just like, everything is just a game to you. So this is a game to move these pieces on the map over here to somewhere else. Enjoy it. Enjoy the fact that you're now building this person right off the get-go to make other people do things for them. At second level, you gain access to Invoke Duplicity. This is the Trickery Domain's channel divinity ability. As an action, you create a perfect illusion of yourself that lasts for a minute, or until you lose concentration as if you were concentrating on a spell. The illusion appears in an unoccupied space that you can see within 30 feet of you. As a bonus action, you can move the illusion up to 30 feet to a space that you can see, but it must remain within 120 feet of you. For the duration, you can cast spells as though you were in the illusion space, but you must use your own senses. Additionally, when both you and your illusion are within 5 feet of a creature that can see the illusion, you have advantage on attack rolls against that creature, given how distracting the illusion is to the target. It's a little bit wordy. It's kind of a bit to unpack. So here's the real important things. First and foremost, you have to discuss how concentrating as if you're concentrating on your spell works for your DM. There's a lot of wiggle room there. You definitely want to iron that out. Second, this is that Loki ability where Loki talks to someone and then like backstabs him, and the two Lokis are there in the same spot and then one disappears. That's this ability. You are casting spells, you can shoot them from the other character, like the other duplicate. So if you're shooting Guiding Bolt, which kind of flies from you, you can pantomime doing it and have it done by the channel divinity, and now the enemy has to discern who's you. It's a perfect duplicate. So there is nothing outside of literally destroying it that will make the enemy think that it's a clone or a copy. It is perfect. If you end up with something like Minor Illusion or something that you can use to throw your voice, that makes Invoke Duplicity even that much better, because you're not just using it in combat, you're using it in adventuring. You're using it when you're conversing with other people. Hide in the shadow, put yourself right next to somebody and talk to them. Find an important person, literally make yourself poof right next to them and tell them you have something really important to tell you, and that you really don't have time to get into it as to who you are or what you're doing here, but it's paramount that they speak to you. Well, that's pretty impressive. That would give me reason to believe that you desperately need to talk to this character, so maybe isolating them from a scenario might be very important. Granted, it's a big poofy show, but it's a great way to get things to be working in your area. Plus, you have that added benefit of being the person behind the shadows watching everything happen, and you're not even in danger. You're now toying with this event. Maybe you're in a scenario where they're hunting mages, and now you just made an exact duplicate of yourself, cast it, had him talk to you, disguise self, walk out. Now the person who spoke to you was clearly talking to someone who can cast magic and teleport themselves, and that might make them look guilty. And now they have to do a whole song and dance to get themselves out of danger into some safe place. And you did it for fun. This person's life could be in jeopardy. You get that ability to come up with these cool concepts when you really start broadening your spell usage to not just combat, but to adventuring. And that's one of the things that this can actually really do. Understand the advantage on attack rolls is very beneficial, and I'm going to bring that up in one of the later abilities as to why you have that and what you can actually do with that. And keep in mind, you do also have spells that have attack rolls, like Inflict Wounds, Guiding Bolt, things like that. They're out there. Spiritual Weapon, all those are attack rolls. So you will have advantage if you're doing it within your Invoke Duplicity. So it is a great option to use in combat as well as adventuring. It's one of those things where if you're really, really manipulative and really, really daring, you can do a lot of great things with it. At 6th level, you get your second Channel Divinity option, which is Cloak of Shadows. As an action, you become invisible until the end of your next turn. You become visible if you attack or cast a spell. This is one of those emergency get out of jail cards. This is, I am trapped, I have nowhere to go, I'm hiding behind a pillar, and I have to get around the enemy. Go invisible. Take the dash action and hope you make it far enough that you can survive the next round after you come out of being visible. It's a great thing to do when you need to get out of something. It's also great if you need to get into something. You can get as close as you can, turn invisible, and then just run right to where you have to go. Guard or no guard, there's a good chance you can just make it right through. It's not too flashy. There really isn't that much to say about it. But understand it is a very good tool to have in a clutch moment. But when it's not a clutch moment, a lot of the times you're going to think, well, this is not really beneficial to me. But if that's the case and you're running games or you're involved in a game that really doesn't suit this kind of ability, use it for fun. Experiment with it. Using it just to figure out what other cool things with it is significantly better than holding on to it until that one moment when you need to use it. Because you gotta be able to do it a couple of times just to know what it's like and really feel the scope of an ability. At 8th level, you gain access to Divine Strike. You gain the ability to infuse your weapon strikes with poison. A gift from your deity. Once on each of your turns, when you hit a creature with a weapon attack, you can cause that attack to deal an extra 1d8 poison damage to the target. When you reach 14th level, the extra damage increases to 2d8. Now, I understand everyone heard poison and their heart just sank. I love poison damage. I know it doesn't really have its place here. The poisoner feat exists so that way at least you're able to overcome resistance, but it doesn't deal with immunity. I get it. I would argue, or at least just talk to my DM and say, hey, can I just burn my second Channel Divinity option and just make my poison damage overcome immunity like Elemental Adapt? I would just do it, because sometimes I don't need to be invisible. Or at least maybe work something out where that works so it's a little bit more viable. I don't think a lot of DMs are going to go, no. Like, I get it. If you're fighting something that's a skeleton, yeah, poisoning it doesn't make sense. I can understand even making an argument for undead that still has muscular tissue. Poison being bad for that because it can cause it to atrophy. It can cause it to break apart. It can do a lot of harm to the body because there's still a body. Please just talk to your DMs. I can't say it enough. 9 times out of 10, they'll go, I mean, you get it at 8th level. Yeah, I'll let it work like Elemental Adapt just for poison. Like, I really can't see a lot of people having too much of an issue with that. Here's another thing that people have with this class, an issue that tend to make people not jump for this class, is you don't get any of the other proficiencies that a lot of the other cleric domains get. You don't get martial weapons, you don't get heavy armor or anything like that to cause you to want to be in melee combat. You have this ability, and yeah, you can use it with ranged attacks, but you don't gain the proficiency from it. I would build a wood elf because they're tied to the Fey world. they can be very easily chaotic or aloof or impartial, and they get short swords, long swords, long bows. So you can use that as your weapon substitute. I think the short sword is highly underrated. I get it's just a D6, but I mean thematically it's a short sword. Anyway, so get that ability. Maybe maybe you picked up a feat, or maybe you rolled really well when you rolled for stats, or however you played your game, and you're able to grab a feat at some point. I'd grab something that can give me Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade. Because it will add on to the damage of Divine Strike. Because it is partially a melee weapon attack, you will be able to add Divine Strike on top of that, and plus you're past 5th level, so you do get that additional D8 on top of it. So one regular attack with a short sword, yeah, it's going to do 1d6, plus whatever dexterity or strength or whatever you decided to go to. But at 8th level, it's 1d6, your modifier, 1d8. If you use Green Flame Blade, another d8, which is pretty awesome. Added on, you get advantage with Invoke Duplicity, so you really have a reason to get in there and just get that one good knife in the back like Loki would in the Marvel movies and really do some damage. And that feels right. That feels great. And you can really build around that. I love poison damage. There's nothing better in the world than poisoning something in games. So just really, really, really understand that just because something has a lot of resistances to it, it doesn't mean it works in every module. Storm King Thunder doesn't have a lot of undead or fiends, so poison works great in that module. If you're not fighting a lot of fiends or undead, you can use poison damage optimally, and it is effective. You can do cool things with it, but this helps really broaden that character out. Because now you're that character that, yeah, he invokes his duplicity a whole bunch of times, casts spells from different areas, sometimes he'll run up and attack, but now you're poisoning things off of impulse constantly, and you're manipulating people because you have the availability to charm people, to do all sorts of crazy stuff. You'll eventually get modified memory soon, and you can change how people think or remember things and cause them to have reason to work for you and start to manipulate people. Maybe you want to dive into some of the aspects you can do to manipulate people into doing things, and you're starting to be scary. You're starting to be scary because you're tiptoeing around that area of illusionary magic being the most evil form of magic. Because no matter what you do, you can charm person before somebody sees you. You can charm person and then maybe get something going, and then you're this horrible person who did this horrible thing, but the person who's convicting you is taking your hand and giving you hugs and wishing you well in front of a group of large people who would have thought otherwise. And then you leave, and now this person has to overcome the public image of what happened. This scenario has developed that you can now change things. Jester did a wonderful thing with the cupcake scene. If you haven't seen it, I'm not going to say too much, but it's a wonderful thing that happened, and it was one spell that did it. And it broke the whole moment of what's going on and really elevated Laura Bailey from person like who was always really good but to just like a god level player because they were able to come up with this great concept. You're toying with lives. You hit this point of being really, really, really aloof, and it doesn't matter to you. This is all just fun and games for you. You can be really crazy with this. I like the idea of an elf that's just going through the world, just following a deity who's really just there to ruin a lot of good things for people and to have a great time for themselves. There's a little bit of Joker-esque to that. There's a little bit of just tearing down the world around you, but not necessarily evil because you don't care enough to hate. It's really just fun for you. And this really helps to show you how inconsequential the lives of the people who are opposed to you are. Because you poison them. Because hitting them isn't enough. You want to make sure they die in a painful manner, regardless if they walk away from you. And that's really what this kind of does. And it really enforces that idea. At 17th level, you gain access to your final Trickery domain ability, Improve Duplicity. You can create up to 4 duplicates instead of 1 when you use your Invoke Duplicity. As a bonus action on your turn, you can move any number of them up to 30 feet to a maximum range of 120 feet. So some of the things stay the same, still have that same exact range. It's still a perfect copy of yourself, but now you get to put out 4. Now, a lot of people are probably thinking, well, what do I do with 4? You know, I had enough trouble just dealing with the other one. What am I supposed to do? It's going to eat up my bonus action to move them around constantly. What if the enemy just keeps moving or teleporting or whatever? What do I do? This is one of those things where you have to really analyze who you are as a character and who you are in combat. There should be a link between the two of them, and it shouldn't be more so built around one as opposed to the other. Walking into a room and seeing 4 of you is a little intimidating to whoever that other person is. So say at this point you're 17th level, you're about that point where like the spells you're casting and the people are casting around you are warping reality. You're really not just someone looking for a job. People come to you for help. You know, like there's a lot to understand of your purpose in the world at that point. But understand, if you're talking to someone and you need to intimidate someone, there's this beautiful idea of just surrounding them with 4 of you. Like, it's intimidating. It's scary. If you're in combat and don't know what to do, circle. And in the midst of circling, swap places with your other duplicates. Now the DM has to wonder which one's the real you, but the enemy can't tell because you just ran in circles and you all stopped at different positions. So it's a little intimidating to figure out who's who and then have that in combat, especially when you're all pantomiming the same motions, because that's obviously something you're going to do. I'm going to attack, and as part of the bonus action, they're going to make movement that emulates the attack. There's a good reason to have that. It's really, really intricate, especially when you're considering you could have your spells jumping from any place around. That is something that DMs really have to account for, and really just shouldn't be, oh, it's you, it's you, it's you, because that really breaks this ability and makes it almost not worth it. You really gotta have a DM that understands that the enemy has to prove that they're smart enough to know the difference, because if the situation was changed, you'd be taking a chance. But the DM knows who's who, so the best way to do it is to make a roll on a d4 and pick which one to attack. And that way, it reflects what's going on. And it's a little bit of play, it's a little bit of metagaming, I know, I get it, but it's definitely something to come up with right when you get the ability, and something that should be reinforced, especially if you've managed to play a game that brings you up to this kind of a level. Our final thoughts. I really like this subclass. I like anything that'll give me poison damage. I love characters that are particularly challenged in what they do. Characters that manipulate people and use illusions and cause people to do things and want to do things that they're not supposed to, or force other people to do things, are very difficult to play. Yeah, there's the roleplay aspect where you have to really conceive ways to do it without offending anybody at your table, which isn't really always that simple. But again, a lot of it comes down to making sure you're comfortable with the people you're playing with and they're comfortable with some of the things you're going to do. Definitely don't want to do anything sexual or force people into doing things sexual. Definitely don't want to do any things that are unnecessarily violent and evil, but you definitely want to make sure things get a little crazy. Like, you definitely want to stand next to a king and say, open all the gates and force all the people in there and let them take whatever they want. And if you can get that to happen, that's pretty crazy. And a lot of fun things could happen from that. But again, that's a little bit of an out there example, but you got to have guts to play a character like this, because there's a lot of risk, but there's a lot of payoff. Yeah, you're casting a spell in a room full of people. Yeah, that might work, that might not, that might rouse a lot of angry turns. But depending on what you can do and if it works, how different everything is, because people can't tell what spell you cast. They can tell you cast one, and that's very important to understand. I love the idea of being a wood elf that's just chaotic neutral, that's just almost maddened by like just this insatiable need to just ruin things that people are enjoying and loving, just to see them go in panic, and just to see that moment where they don't know where to turn, and just have like to just power through a scenario. And you can flavor it for whatever reason you want. You're trying to bring them closer to any god, because whoever they turn to in that moment is going to get a new devout follower, and it's important to you that people see the value of dedicating themselves, for you yourself have dedicated yourself to a god. And doing those things are exciting. And yeah, you can be just evil and just be like, I just want to see if they're going to turn bad. I just want to see the limits of morality. And you can really, really push that. And you can be maniacal and wear clown paint and just be all weird and always hiding in the shadows and never, ever have anyone know if it's the real you or if it isn't. Because that is a very powerful tool. That is something that you really engrave into your character. You can do fun, crazy things, grab things. Maybe you can get spells that really reinforce what you're doing. Learn to throw your voice, learn to do other things, and push yourself to do these things that are somewhat difficult, because you know what? You've played this game before. You've played this game a bunch of times. You wanted to try something new. You wanted to try something challenging. Lay it all down on the line. Put it all on one attack. Put it all on one ability. Put it out there. Like, yeah, you gotta know when to not do that. But in combat and things like that, having everything come down to one attack is stressful. Look at rogues that don't use bonus actions to attack, or don't use dual like daggers or anything like that, and just go on one shot, and then just kind of have to create really, really elaborate ways to give themselves the benefit of hitting, because it all comes down to that. And then remember when they hit. Remember when they hit or when they crit, and that exuberant feeling. You get that. You get that, and you get all this incredible ability just to be wild. You can be creative. You can be this really fey entity that just doesn't bother talking to someone unless they've managed to manipulate them into already loving them. Like, that's a really wild concept, and you get this awesome, like, really, really powerful feel to your character, because all the regular things don't really matter. It's a great concept. I could talk for days about how much fun it is to manipulate NPCs and really abuse scenarios and use things that intimidate and cause fear, and the joys of poison damage. But I gotta bring this video to an end at some point. So, please, if you like what we do here, please, again, like, share, subscribe. I want to thank D-Span for producing this video and for helping inspire me to really attempt to getting very close to actually exercising and bettering my life. Hasn't happened yet, but I'm chomping at the bit at this point, so we're gonna give it a go pretty soon. And again, thank you all for giving a Spooky Kid a chance.